to Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Yvonne Wolf. Today, our special guest is research scientist Mandy Sha. She is author, editor, and co-author of 4 new books about the role of language and survey research to reach diverse populations. I met Mandy through Toastmasters. Welcome, Mandy.
Thank you, Yvonne.
All of your books are about survey research. Are they relevant to our daily life?
Yvonne, surveys are about asking questions, and asking the right questions is important in research and in life. Einstein once said that if he had just 1 hour and his life depended on it, he would spend the first 55 minutes figuring out the question, because once he knew the right question to ask, he could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. I built a 20-year career refining survey questions on behalf of federal agencies, commercial and nonprofit organizations to survey diverse populations. And the results of scientific surveys help decision makers provide accurate data and to understand the opinions, behaviors, and experiences of people. And can I tell you, Yvonne, to have accurate data and to solve problems, we must ask the right questions. And that works the same in research or in life, just like Einstein said.
Well, Mandy, it sounds like your series of books should be called The Art of Asking the Right Questions. So what is the role of language in asking the right questions? You and I both speak more than one language, and we know that there's questions that come out differently from language to language.
To ask the right questions, the first step is to understand that language is more than just the dictionary. It functions in social and cultural contexts. I learned that firsthand. The first time my husband, Javier, took me home to meet his mother, he's Mexican American, he asked me to do something for him. Mandy, he asked, could you get a dozen tortillas? Here in the Chicago area, tortillas are usually packaged like this. They're usually 12 inside a pack.
Yes.
And that day, I made quite the first impression on my future mother-in-law because I brought her 144 tortillas. I thought Javier asked me to get 12 packs of tortillas. He said a dozen, but he meant just 1 pack of 12 tortillas. So what happened? There was no language issue. We were speaking the same language. He was clear, and I understood all the words. A dozen means 12, but I simply did not have the cultural or social background to interpret his questions as intended. So social and cultural context and factors definitely affect language use. It's more than just a dictionary.
Oh, so true, Mandy. We have a number of stories like that we can share for our daily lives or travel abroad. Now, can we avoid most pitfalls by translating what we say in cross-cultural communication settings?
That's a good question. Translation is definitely a useful tool in cross-cultural communication settings when we do not speak the language of our listeners. However, translation is not a mechanical process where we simply replace the words in one language, in English, with the words in the other language. And again, I learned it firsthand. When I was learning English, one day the teacher asked us a question. What's your pet peeve? One of my classmates said, oh, this question doesn't apply to me. I can't answer that. I don't have pets. The other classmate said, well, I do not have any pet peeves. I have 2 dogs and I like them. And guess what I said?
What did you say, Mandy?
Well, as you know, pet peeve means something annoying. My classmates clearly knew the word pet, and I think they also knew or looked up the word peeve, but they did not know they're supposed to go together as an idiom. If the translation simply replaces the word pet and the word peeve in their native language, will they understand it? Well, the words and sentences will be grammatically correct at the lexical and syntactic levels. But at the pragmatic level of communication, they will not communicate the communicative effect of pet peeve in English.
Wow, that is so true. So many people who come to this country as researchers and graduate students speak perfect English, but then when they interact with Americans, many times they find that their English doesn't really work in socializing. Can you tell us more about what you mean by lexical and syntactic and pragmatic levels of communication?
Sure. Here is a schematic from one of my books because I want to show you the complexity and also the beauty of language use. As you can see in the schematic, language use sits in the middle because it's the anchor point where lexical, syntactic, and pragmatic levels of language converge. Simply put, lexical, syntactic refer to the words, sentences, and how we arrange them so they make sense. But what's grammatically correct, as we've seen about pet peeve, may not be understood as intended in the pragmatic sense, or we know what it means, but it just does not sound natural. For example, when we go to Canada, they say washroom. I mean, we know they mean a restroom, but we just don't say it that way here in the States.
Sure.
And the lexical and syntactic levels are not very hard to achieve, but the pragmatic level is just not that straightforward.
That's so true. When we think about, well, in Europe, they use the word toilet more often, and I know that many Americans find that term very embarrassing to use. How do we achieve the pragmatic level in cross-cultural communication then?
Mm-hmm. By understanding that language is not used in isolation, it involves 3 components. And as you can see from the schematic here, they are linguistic rules, cultural norms, and social practices. They interact with each other. The linguistic rules of a language can be learned in school, and it can be translated fairly easily, but the pragmatic level, which is where cultural norms and social practices reside, they're usually learned in life and harder to translate.
And pick up.
Yes, what are social practices? They are concepts and practices that are common in a culture or society. For example, here in the States, we know what a foster program is, but that concept simply does not exist in some societies or cultures.
Yes.
And cultural norms are cultural values and references, and they are also unique to a culture or a language.
Yes, when I lived in Denmark, I remember that they didn't understand the American use of senior citizens. So they just didn't know why there's such a long term for someone who's 55 or 65 and over. So I love that example, Mandy. And so what are some solutions to communicate some concepts that do not exist in another culture or language?
For example, to translate foster program that we just talked about in Spanish, we can use a descriptive phrase like this one. And I provided the meaning in English. Notice that it doesn't match foster program word for word, but achieves the pragmatic purpose. It also uses the word foster because this research we did was intended for Spanish speakers living in the States. So most likely they would actually understand the word foster. And I also once tested a simple survey question. How old are you? My research participants spoke primarily Korean, and they live in Chicago. And one of them paused and asked me back, do you mean my Korean age or American age?
That's right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
In the Korean culture, a person is considered 1 year old upon birth.
Yes.
So your Korean age, Yvonne, is actually a year older than the age showing on your Illinois driver's license.
That's correct. In Chinese culture as well, we count the date of conception. So your prenatal age is added to your official age.
Mm-hmm. And what I did, Yvonne, is called pre-testing in the research world to get real life feedback from language users. And the results of pre-testing are illuminating because, for example, now I know to be direct and ask for their American age when I need to ask someone who speaks primarily Korean what their age is. And why is precision important? It's important because on official documents and also among applications, immigrants need to put their age in order to be precise and to fulfill the requirements. And so pre-testing is a very useful tool in the research world.
Oh, Manny, there's nothing as a simple question. I understand what your point is precisely also because Chinese people also often use their lunar calendar for their birthdays. So even their birthdays may not match the Western calendar.
Mhm.
Well, I enjoy a presentation you gave about getting to the point in cross-cultural communication settings. Can you talk about that?
Certainly, regardless of language or culture, the most effective communications are concise and direct. You need to get to the point. The key, however, is knowing when to get to the point, when to make your main points in a cross-cultural communication setting. I once showed study participants a letter from the US government, and one person told me this. It was translated in her native language, and the letter got to the point promptly about asking them to participate in a government survey. So, what was the problem? When the letter was translated in Chinese, the cultural norm of communication in the English language was also translated. And what we know from linguistic literature is that English speakers prefer to present their main points before going into details. And that's why, Yvonne, many Americans tend to focus on the beginning part of the message as the most crucial. speakers of some Asian languages tend to introduce their main points later in the conversation, after giving details, and very importantly, after establishing common ground. And in that US government letter, the main point was asking them to participate in a government survey. And it was presented before all the details about the survey. And that is not her cultural norm of communication, even though the letter was in her native language.
So in this sense, Mandy, it looks like Google Translate, these one button that changes your website to another language, seems so mechanical and absolutely useless. Is there a solution when cultural norms of communication like this is so different?
Mm-hmm. Well, here's what we did in that situation. We moved the main point about participating in the survey to the latter part of the letter and put details about the survey first. We didn't change the actual words. I mean, this time that research participant told us that she understood it now. And so when she didn't understand the letter the first time, it was because it had gotten to the point too promptly for her. And just one caveat, the study I just mentioned about getting to the point was conducted in Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, Russian, and English. We did not look into South Asian languages such as Hindi, and also to not stereotype any groups. Just keep in mind that communication styles can vary within a culture and language. And communication styles can also change over time. I mean, take me for an example. At this point of my life, English has become my primary language. So I also tend to get to the point promptly.
Oh, sure. It depends on your audience, doesn't it? Also, I see that the research sheds a lot of light on how government or community outreach programs should be done. Is it just a standard translation, or they actually have to make that language work in the context of that culture? So, given the complexity of language and communication norms, what's your experience and opinion about machine translations like Google Translate I mentioned? Should we use it at all?
That's an excellent question. I think it's very promising. For the past 5 years, that's my understanding, that Google Translate has been using neural machine translation to provide translation in, I think, over 100 languages. What's neural machine translation? It's an application of deep learning, and they use massive data sets of translated sentences to train a model to perform translation of whole sentences like human speaking. This is a significant improvement over machine translation methods that was used in the past. And from the research side, one of my collaborators have been working on European social sciences and humanities open cloud project to experiment with the use of machine translation in different settings. They found that neural machine translation is significantly improving the quality of machine translation output. But human editing is necessary to ensure quality of machine translation, because when we are using them in scientific surveys, we need precision and accuracy. So I think the original question was about Google Translate. Can you replace humans completely? Yvonne, let's
Hi.
do an
Yeah,
experiment.
sure.
Yvonne, let's try pet peeve.
Sure.
And I have Spanish there. It means the pet annoys. All right, how about Chinese? You speak Chinese, right?
Correct.
All right. This means pampering. All right, let's try Korean.
For your pet. Yeah.
This means pet peas. All right. So as you can see, there's more work to do, but it's very promising. And I look forward to observing the trends.
I agree, Mandy, because years ago when we used to put in city names like Seattle into Google Translate, you get some mumble jumble. It didn't work at all. But now I see that they are using standardized transliteration that Chinese use in the United States. And some of that is changed depending on is simplified Chinese as is mandated in China versus traditional Chinese as Taiwan has been using for a lot longer to express Seattle, let's say, than China. So, well, could you give us a takeaway from today in 1 minute, Mandy? You've shared such wonderful, fascinating information with us already.
I'd be happy to, Yvonne. When we think of a language, we often think of spoken and written words and grammar. Yet, language also includes signs and symbols like arrows. And these days, we also use this emojis.
Yes.
Communication relies on using accurate words, signs, and symbols to help convey what we mean and also to express relationship. Social and cultural factors affect language use. The norms of communication are systematically different among people because we are different and because we draw upon the social and cultural context that we are most familiar with, that we identify with. Those contexts include gender, gender identities, generation, status, and origin and culture. By understanding how language functions in social and cultural contexts, we can begin to address barriers in cross-cultural communication settings.
Thank you, Mandy. And what is your message for other authors out there?
Just do it. In May 2019, I sat in a short course taught by two of the most prominent scholars in cross-cultural research. And I thought to myself, why aren't we sharing more of this type of research? And I realized that my course mates and I share the same problem. It's hard to publish. Sometimes hard work alone doesn't seem enough. And that's the moment, Yvonne, a movement was born. I stood up and one of the scholars gave me his microphone and I declared, we are all going to write a book together. And a year later, in the midst of the pandemic, not only we wrote and published that book in 1 year only, and it was peer reviewed, all 28 authors signed away our copyright to make our book open access. And today, Yvonne, our book was named a book every market research leader should read in 2021. And Yvonne, my message again is just do it.
Oh, congratulations, Mandy, to you. That's such an inspiring message. There's so much that we can learn from each other in cross-cultural communication, especially in the United States where we have a country that's built on immigrants and immigrant cultures. I just enjoy our conversation and the way you can make such research material understandable to anybody on the street. Mandy, you live right next door to Glenview. Tell us what you enjoy about Glenview.
I love the Glenview Public Library. It's such a great resource to the community and the communities around in Glenview, and also the people of Glenview. I so enjoyed our time together today, Yvonne. Thank you again.
Thank you for being on our program, and thank you for watching. Join us next time on Off the Shelf.